November 25, 1991. A quiet home in Granite Bay, California. A father walks through the front door with his 4-year-old daughter, expecting to find his wife finishing up a few chores at her sister's house. Instead, he finds silence, and then crying. His 11-month-old baby, alone, strapped into her high chair, her mother nowhere in sight. Her shoes.
And saw the baby crying and said, "Where's my wife?" And we haven't seen her since.
What happened to her would remain a mystery for over 3 decades, until a single piece of DNA changed everything. Granite Bay, California, an upscale suburb of Sacramento, tucked against the shores of Folsom Lake. Gated estates, manicured lawns. Some called it the Beverly Hills of the Sacramento region. It was the kind of place families moved to for the safety, low crime, good schools, the kind of neighborhood where you didn't lock your doors, because nothing bad ever happened here. That Monday morning looked like any other. A mother, spending her day helping out at her sister's house, folding laundry, tidying rooms, watching her baby girl in the next room. An ordinary chore, on an ordinary street, in a town where nothing was supposed to go wrong. By the end of the day, that would no longer be true. Her name was Cindy Wanner, 35 years old, a wife, a mother of 2, a 4-year-old daughter who followed her everywhere, and an 11-month-old baby girl just beginning to find her feet. Cindy wasn't the kind of person who sat still. To bring in a little extra money for her family, she'd spend some days cleaning houses, and that Monday, it was her sister's home she was tending to, just a short drive from her own. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it meant she could keep her baby close while she did it, bringing her along, letting her sit nearby in a high chair while she worked room to room. Neighbors would later describe her as warm, dependable, the kind of mother who showed up, for school pickups, for family, for the small, unremarkable moments that make up an ordinary life. She had no reason to think that Monday would be any different from 100 others before it. It was late in the afternoon when Cindy's husband pulled into the driveway, their 4-year-old daughter in tow. He expected the same thing he always did. His wife, finishing up, ready to head home for dinner. Instead, he was met with an unsettling quiet. He stepped inside, calling her name. No answer. He moved through the house, room by room, and that's when he found her, their 11-month-old baby, still strapped into her high chair, right where Cindy had left her, crying, alone. But no Cindy. He checked outside. Her car was still parked exactly where she'd left it. Inside the house, her shoes sat by the door. Her coat hung untouched. Everything she would have needed to leave, she'd left behind. There was no broken window, no overturned furniture. No signs of a struggle anywhere in the house. It was as if she had simply been erased mid-motion, one moment tending to her chores, her baby just a few feet away, and the next, gone. For a mother who never would have walked away from her child, not for a moment, let alone without her shoes or her coat in the cold of a California November. This wasn't just strange, it was terrifying. Panic set in fast. Family was called. Then police. Within hours, what should have been an ordinary Monday evening in Granite Bay had turned into the beginning of a search for a woman who had vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but a crying baby, an untouched house, and a mystery that would haunt this quiet community for the next 34 years. Word spread fast through Granite Bay, a mother of 2, gone, without a trace, in a town where things like this simply didn't happen. Search parties formed almost immediately. Neighbors combed nearby fields. Law enforcement fanned out across the area, following every possible lead, checking every road Cindy might have traveled. Flyers went up. The community rallied the way small towns do when one of their own goes missing, refusing to believe the worst, holding on to hope that she'd be found alive. Days turned into a week, then 2, then 3, with no sign of Cindy anywhere. Then, in a remote wooded area outside Forest Hill, Nearly 35 miles from the home she vanished from, a hunter came across something no one wanted to find.
In her underwear.
I seen her on the side of the trail, so I went back and called the authorities.
Cindy had been raped and
An autopsy revealed she had died from strangulation, but it was what investigators found beyond that which turned this case into something far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The evidence suggested Cindy hadn't been killed right away. She had been kept alive for days after she was taken from that highchair-lined kitchen in Granite Bay. For 3 weeks, her family had prayed she might still be out there, waiting to be found. Now, they were left with an even harder truth to sit with. For at least part of that time, she had been. That revelation didn't just close one chapter of Cindy's story. It reopened an entirely new and far more chilling investigation into who could have done this and why. In the weeks that followed, investigators worked the case hard. They canvassed the neighborhood, questioned anyone who might have seen something, a car, a stranger, anything out of place near that quiet Granite Bay street. But there were no witnesses. No one had seen Cindy taken. No one had seen anyone leave with her. Whoever did this had come and gone without a trace, in broad daylight, in a town where neighbors noticed everything. Evidence was collected from the scene and sent for forensic testing. But in 1991, DNA technology was still in its early days. Samples that might one day identify a killer sat in evidence storage, waiting on science that simply didn't exist yet. Without a witness, without a match, without a single solid lead, the trail went cold. Weeks became months. Months became years. Cindy's case shifted from active investigation to unsolved file, one of Placer County's most haunting mysteries. A mother taken from her own family, her killer walking free, unnamed and unknown. For her husband, her children, growing up without her, her sister, who never stopped wondering what she could have done differently that day. There were no answers, only the quiet, grinding weight of not knowing. Detectives never officially closed the case, but as the years wore on, with no new leads coming in, it seemed like Cindy Wanner's killer might simply get away with it, forever. Then, decades later, science finally caught up. For over 3 decades, Placer County's cold case unit never let Cindy's file gather dust. Every few years, as forensic technology advanced, they'd resubmit pieces of evidence, hoping for a match that had eluded them before. Time after time, nothing. Then, one final piece of evidence was sent to a forensic lab for advanced DNA analysis. And this time, the results didn't come back empty. A match. A name investigators had never connected to Cindy before. James Lawhead, Jr. What they uncovered about him made the case even more chilling. Just 11 years earlier, in 1980, Lawhead had broken into a home and committed a brutal, violent attack, assaulting an elderly woman and a young child. He was convicted and sentenced to 19 years in prison, but he didn't serve anywhere close to that. Lawhead was released after just 11 years, in February of 1991. Despite psychiatric evaluations at the time labeling him a mentally disordered sex offender, unlikely to respond to treatment, he walked free. 10 months later, Cindy Wanner was abducted from her sister's home. Investigators now had a name, a motive, a man with a documented history of violence, released back into society mere months before Cindy vanished. But there was a problem. When detectives went looking for James Lawhead, he was nowhere to be found. No address, no employment records, no paper trail of any kind. He had brushes with the law in the early 2000s, including a failure to register as a sex offender. But after 2005, James Lawhead simply disappeared. No sightings. No records, no trace. The man detectives believed had murdered Cindy Wanner had vanished, just as completely as she once had, and it would take one more breakthrough to bring him back into the light. For years, James Lawhead was a ghost. Detectives believed he was likely still alive, likely still hiding. But where? They had no idea. The break came from an unexpected place. Detectives reached out to law enforcement agencies across the western United States, asking them to check their records for anyone who might match Lawhead's description. An analyst with the Scottsdale Police Department in Arizona ran a facial recognition search against state transportation records, comparing old booking photos to driver's license and ID photos on file. And there he was, a man living under the name Vincent Reynolds in Bullhead City, Arizona. For 20 years, Lawhead hadn't just disappeared. He'd built an entirely new life under a false identity, hiding in plain sight in a quiet Arizona town, his neighbors having no idea who was actually living among them. On April 24th, investigators moved in. Lawhead was arrested right in his own driveway, the search for him finally over, 34 years after Cindy Wanner vanished. But what detectives found inside his home raised even more questions. $15,000 in cash. A burner phone. Not exactly what you'd expect to find in the home of an ordinary man living a quiet retirement. It painted the picture of someone who may have always known this day could come. Someone prepared, even after 2 decades, to run again at a moment's notice. This time, he wouldn't get the chance. But James Lawhead wasn't the only one who had questions to answer. The Arizona home he'd been living in, the one where he built his life as Vincent Reynolds, didn't belong to him. It belonged to his sister, 71-year-old Terry Lawhead Steele. For over 20 years, whenever investigators asked, Terry told them the same thing. She hadn't heard from her brother in decades. As far as she knew, he might even be dead. But once detectives started digging, that story fell apart. Evidence showed the two had remained in contact for years, all while Terry continued telling law enforcement, including detectives working this very case just weeks before the arrest, that she had no idea where he was. One day after her brother's arrest, Terry was taken into custody in South Carolina on accessory charges. Investigators searched her California home the following day. For over 2 decades, while a family in Granite Bay grieved without answers, and a killer lived free under a false name, his own sister may have known exactly where he was the whole time. Nearly 2 months after his arrest, James Lawhead Jr. stood before a judge in Placer County Superior Court. He pleaded guilty to murder, to kidnapping, and to special circumstance allegations confirming the killing occurred during a kidnapping and a rape. There would be no trial. No drawn-out proceedings forcing Cindy's family to relive the worst day of their lives in a courtroom. Lawhead waived his right to appeal and accepted a sentence of life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For a family that had waited 34 years for this moment, it meant one thing above all: certainty. No more unanswered questions. No more wondering. Placer County District Attorney Morgan Geyer put it simply: cold cases are not forgotten cases. They remain urgent. They remain personal. And time, she said, does not erase responsibility, nor does it diminish the commitment to seeing justice through. Cindy Wanner was 35 years old when her life was taken from her, and from the 2 young daughters who grew up without a mother. 34 years later, the truth finally caught up to the man responsible. Justice arrived late. But for Cindy, and for the family who never stopped waiting, it arrived all the same. For 34 years, Cindy Wanner's name lived in the quiet corners of Placer County, spoken by detectives who never gave up, remembered by a community that never forgot, and carried, every single day, by a family who simply wanted to know the truth. They didn't get their answer quickly. They didn't get it easily. But in the end, they got it. Cindy's case is a reminder that cold doesn't mean forgotten. Somewhere, in an evidence locker or a database, the truth is often still waiting for the right piece of technology, the right person, the right moment to bring it into the light. If you found this case as haunting as we did, subscribe to Cold Crime Files, because somewhere out there, another family is still waiting for their answers. And we'll be here to tell you when the next cold case finally gets its own.